Okay, so we're now going to build another mini application, and this time we're going to do a fake database lookup almost. So if you can imagine on the back end of your server, whichever language you use to build the functionality that you deal with, you are going to send a piece of data. So in this case, it's going to be a name. You're going to do a database lookup. You're going to output the results in a JSON format, in a specific JSON format. And in our case, we're using PHP, so we can use JSON decode or encode, sorry. Then we're going to return the results, loop through them, and output them within this this detail list here. So if we take a quick look at how this works, I go ahead and enter the name of the person I want to look up and click submit, and you can see that the data then populates here, and this is all via an AJAX request. If I type in a name that doesn't exist, for example, and I hit submit, we just get this sort of not found alert. You can probably more gracefully handle it. But again, if I was to enter another name and hit submit, we get different information back yet again. So we're going to be looking at specifically sending data and then processing this on the back end. The main difference within this application is that we're going to be returning a JSON object. Within that's going to be a success property, which is a Boolean, so that will be true or false. We can then use this to check on the client side with JavaScript, has this been successful? If it has, what we're then going to do is loop through each of these properties and output them where they exist. So if, for example, job didn't exist, this wouldn't be populated. So it basically means that you get this sort of level of flexibility, and we're now sort of venturing into the ability to output data but be able to have it instantly updated. So at the end of this tutorial, we'll look at adding another property on here and seeing how that handles and seeing how quickly and easily it is to update things, because what we don't want to do is get into the situation where we create functionality but then it's really difficult for us to actually update it. So we're going to go ahead and head over to our text editor and start fresh from this, build the markup, build the JavaScript, build the backend, and see how this all ties together. And then at the end, we'll examine how we can make this this data ability to retrieve data as easy as possible. So we're starting with absolutely nothing here at all. We've just got an empty body, and well, the only thing inside of here is the script tag to jQuery and our empty script tags. The first thing I want to do is build up the markup just so I can see how this is going to work. Then we can start to attach some event handlers, create our PHP file that we're going to do the lookup within, building the AJAX functionality as we go, and then we can loop through and output the data. So fairly straightforward. We've seen this before, but we're using a slightly different way of retrieving the data and looping through it. So the first thing I want to do is create a label, and this is going to house the text field and the label. So the label's name, and inside of here I'm going to create a input type of text, and I'm going to give this an ID of name, which will just allow us to identify it when we click the following button, and that's an input type of submit, and we'll give this an ID of fetch, so we can apply an event handler to this when we click it. So let's just go over to our browser and see what that looks like. So it's just the ability to enter a name and hit submit. Let's create the event handler for this now, so we sort of do this as we go along. So the event handler is going to be on the fetch button. We use the on method to say on click. We want to apply a call or run a callback function here, and in here we just want to do the AJAX functionality. So I'm just going to click OK, type OK, and we'll see that when we hit submit, this just says OK here. Right, so instead of console logging, we want to obviously perform AJAX functionality, but after we've done that, we want to apply the data to this definition list. So we can create the DT and the DD elements here. So DT is going to be basically like the title, I guess, of the element, and here is going to be what the data is returned. So in this case, I'm going to give each of these a class. Now these are really important. I'll just duplicate these elements down, and then I'll explain why the class names are so important here. So we're going to have age, location, and job, and we'll change these classes to match this as well. Job. Now the reason that we have created classes for these is that what's going to happen is when we return the JSON, we'll have properties like so. So we'll have a information object, and inside of this we'll have name. Sorry, not name. We'll have age, 21 for example. Location as something else. And we'll also have job as something else as well. So what's going to happen is when we get this information, we're going to loop through, and this is going to relate to the class name that we apply the data to. And that's going to make it extremely easy in future for us to extend this functionality. So let's just say we decide to add another property, maybe date of birth or something like that, for example. Then what this will do is this is incorrect information, but what this will do is it will then look up any item on the page that has a class of DOB and will apply this data to it. So it means we don't have to sort of build in all this additional functionality. There's no need to make it more complicated than it is, and this just makes it flexible to update in the future. So I guess with that, let's just take a look at exactly how we want the JSON to appear when we have it returned, because this is extremely important in how we want to define how we want to do certain checks and things like that. So we'll have a property called success, and this will either be true or false. And if this is false, we're not going to include anything else. So it will just literally be this object that's returned. And what that will do is it allows us to say if success is false, or if success is true, do something useful. If it isn't true, i.e. it's false, then we just don't do anything, because we don't need to include an information object if this is true. If this is false, if this is true, we want information to be exactly like what we've just explained. So it will have an age here, it will have a location, and it will have a job, and that's all. And then what we want to do is loop through this information data. So we'll keep this up for reference. For now, what we want to do is actually build in the basic Ajax functionality. When we hit the fetch button, we want to grab the name and pass it through to a specific file. So when we hit the fetch button, we want to perform an Ajax request to a specific URL, which is going to be, let's call it lookup.php, and the data type that we're expecting back is JSON. The type of request is going to be GET, although we don't need to define this. We'll define it anyway, and we'll set cache to false, because this is by default false. This is by default true, but we'll set cache to false anyway, just because it's not required. So success function. For now, we'll just console.log the data that we get back, and we can see how this sort of looks. So at the moment, we don't have a lookup.php file, so when we go ahead and type a name in and hit submit, we get an error, a get error 404, and you can see that that's returned here as a 404 in our network tab. So what do? Well, obviously we go ahead and we build this lookup.php file. So what we're going to do here is sort of simulate a database lookup by storing a load of results in a PHP array, and then we will look up the data that we provide in the form from that array. So it would work the same as a database would, but we're just doing it from an array, because we don't want to get too much into detail of which database we're using and all that stuff, because it might not be relevant to yourself. So let's go ahead and first of all define what content type we want to pass back from this file, and that is of course application JSON. So we go ahead and use PHP's header function, which we can use to set whatever header we like, and in this case it's content type, and that's going to be application/JSON. Now let's go ahead and create an array of data that we want to allow to be searched. So in this case we're going to have Alex, and that's going to be another array within that, and this should be similar really based on whatever backend language you're using. So I'm going to say age. We want to say location. And we want to say job. Okay, now we want another record in here, and that's going to be this. Again, exactly the same as the details that we have in here. So we've got an age. We've got a location. And again, we have a job here. So now that we've got this people array, let's go ahead and just do a print R on this just to see how it's structured. In fact, no, we won't. We will say, no, we'll leave this. The reason being is that we're not actually echoing out or outputting this people array at all. What we're actually doing is we want to create a separate variable. And this may get a little bit confusing, but bear with. We're going to say exists true. And that's all we're going to do for now. And later on, what we're going to do is we're going to echo JSON encode return. What that's going to do is it's going to return this array in JSON notation like we've already seen. In fact, we'll change this to false by default. So let's go ahead and just do this. So I'm going to type in Alex here and hit submit. And let's just look in the console. We get an object with exists false. So that's by default. We've not passed anything to this yet. We've not done anything. So let's go ahead and build in the functionality for this being false. So we're going to say if, and we're going to have else. So if data.exists, do something useful, i.e. get the data back and output it and put it inside of each of these elements here. Otherwise, we're just going to do a rubbish alert because we don't really care about this at the moment. You can make it a little more user-friendly, a little more functional. So when I type in Alex and hit submit, we get this not found error because by default at the moment, all we're doing within our lookup.php file is returning this which says exists false. But in here, what we need to do is we need to take into account data that we send through here, i.e. the name that we enter. So we send this, we can just send this in here. So that will be data, name, and that will be like Alex or something like that. So what we need to do is say var name equals hash name dot val, which will give us the value. And in here, we'll then replace that with the name variable here. So now this is sending through a query string parameter called name with the value Alex if we were to type Alex in here, or Joshua if we were to type Joshua in there. So we'll just check this out, make sure it's working okay. So click submit, not found, fine. But in here you can see name equals Alex and we've got caching set to false. When we click on this and click on headers, you can see that we have the query string parameter name set to Alex. So we know that we can now access this within PHP or whatever language that you're using on this side. So we can do a little check in here just to say if is set $_get, which is the way that we get items in PHP from the from query string headers. So if is set get name, then we want to say return. Oh, in fact, no, we want to check whether this exists in this array yet now. So we're going to say if again is set something. So we can create a new variable called down here called name with get name, and we can trim that. Now, if is set people, and let's access the name that we want. So this will be people Alex or people Joshua or people Dale, for example. If that's set, so the only two that are set are Alex and Joshua. So if that is set, we want to go ahead and input the information. Now otherwise this will just stay as exists false, so it'll automatically be not found. It's guilty before proven not guilty, is probably the best way to describe it. So if that is set, i.e. is it found, or if this could be a sort of database check in the background, if the database value is found, then what do we want to do? Well, the first thing that we want to do is say return exists equals true. So we're saying we want the exists value to be set to true. Then we want to say return information equals, and we want this to equal basically the array within this. So we just say people name. Okay, cool. So that might have been a little bit confusing if you're not used to PHP, but now let's go ahead and actually go back to our file here, and instead of doing something useful for now, we'll console.log data.information. So in here, when we type in a name, let's just type in Billy, hit submit, it says not found. We were expecting that. With Alex, we know that it should be found, so when we hit submit, we send this value, and in the console you can see that we've got all of the information relating to this person back from our PHP file. We've got this information and we can actually start to do something with it now. So what we're now going to do is loop through the names of the properties that have been returned here, and with these names of properties, what we're then going to do is apply them to the classes that we have created here, because they match. And that means that if you were to, in your lookup file, add an additional property, or for example not have a specific property available, that wouldn't matter, because the data, the class would not be found, or the class would additionally be found, and that would automatically update itself. But that's a little bit difficult to probably understand, so we'll have a look at a working example of that also. Okay, so what we're going to do now then is we're going to loop through the data information property, which contains that object of different information, and for that we're going to use a for loop. Now within this we're going to create a label for each loop, and that's within the data.information object. So with doing this, if I just console log 1 for example, you'll be able to see that when we actually type in a name here, hit submit, you can see that 1 is looped or output 3 times, and that means that we would loop through here 3 times, and we can do something interesting with the data that we get back. And in this case, what it's going to be is it's going to be finding the label, which could be, for example, age, not the label, sorry, the class name, age, location, or job, which are inside of this data information. So in fact, it might be useful to console log out label to see what this information involves. So if I type in Alex, you can see we've got age, location, and job. Now if, for example, for Alex we also returned date of birth or something like that, then what we would see is this also output in our list, and that means that we can create a class here of DOB and actually set that information on the fly without having to update much with our actual code. In fact, there'd be no additional updating of code within here. It would only be in here that we'd need to update. Again, we'll look at an example of that in just a moment. So here what we want to do is we want to say dot something. So what's that dot something? Well, that's plus label. So that's dot age, dot location, dot DOB, or dot whatever you want it to be. Then we want to set text within here, and we want that to be from the data information object, and we want to specifically look for the label. So this would be age, location, or whatever. So we're basically matching up the class name to the data that we want to actually return. So in this case, what's going to happen is when we type in Alex, it's going to loop through, it's going to find the age, it's going to set the value of the age class, so the value of the age class to the value from the age property, same with the location, same with the job as well. And obviously if that data did not exist, so if we were to get rid of job here, you would see that when we go ahead and type in Alex, we only retrieve the age and the location, whereas when we type in Joshua, we get all three back. So it's starting to become flexible despite the data that we actually send back. Now let's say Alex had an additional property, and in fact maybe Joshua had an additional property, date of birth. All we would need to do is we would just need to say 16/11/1989, and let's just copy and paste this to save some time. So if they both had a date of birth property, this wouldn't affect the actual application here, doesn't affect anything at all. But if then we wanted to go and add this property to our output, we can simply copy and paste this, change this to DOB, change the class name to DOB, and that will automatically pick up the fact that there is a DOB available, and it would output that as well. So we've done all this using Ajax. We have returned data in a JSON format, JavaScript object notation format. On success, we're looping through the data if it's available and applying it to class names. And we've also implemented this as a future-proof solution where if we did want to output any additional properties, we can do simply by adding a new class and adding the back-end output to what we need to actually output on the front end. So that's a basic mini application of how we would do a little lookup in a database, search for a name, and return the relevant data.